They questioned her credit at the deal table, but when she came back, everything changed. What will happen when the people who doubted her realize who they're really dealing with? Let us know in the comments section below. Stephanie Holt didn't blink when the junior associate passed the folder to the left, skipping her. He was careful about it too. Smooth, practiced, like it wasn't the fifth time he'd ignored her hand outstretched. Her lips didn't move, but her gaze cut the air with precision. Still, no one at the table met her eyes, except for one. Clara Mullins, head of legal, head of the icy silence, head of the unspoken rule book everyone else in this room seemed to follow. Let's get through the borrower's disclosures before we circle back to Holt Capital's collateral, Clara said, already flipping to another tab in her binder. Her tone was breezy, professional, but Stephanie had heard versions of this line her entire life. The deferment, the delay, the dismissal. Stephanie leaned back. She'd spent the last decade training her face not to flinch, not to narrow her eyes or twitch at the corners of her mouth, and today would be no different. Except today, she wasn't just another woman in the room. She was the woman who funded the room. Ben Kellerman, VP of Commercial Development for Blanton Bank, adjusted his cufflink and glanced at Clara. We still have concerns about the credit trail. It's incomplete. He didn't say unreliable, but the word hung in the air like bad cologne. It's nothing personal, of course. Of course. Stephanie folded her hands neatly in her lap. It's never personal, she said, her voice like velvet over steel. No one responded. She watched them shuffle through papers with choreographed discomfort, each of them hiding behind jargon and spreadsheets as if they didn't already know who she was. They knew. They just didn't want to know. Stephanie Holt had acquired, developed, and flipped more square footage in 3 years than the entire table combined. She could have called their boss, or their boss's boss, but she'd chosen to sit here today on equal ground. She would not make that mistake again. Across the table, her associate, Renee Caldwell, shifted in her chair. She was younger, bolder, and vibrating with anger, but one look from Stephanie kept her silent. Not yet. Stephanie's thoughts drifted. Not to the building on Ashford and 9th they were debating over. Not to the underwriting delay they were now blaming on internal policy. But to a girl in a gray blazer 12 years ago, standing in the copy room of a glass tower downtown. That girl had triple-checked the financials of a deal that wasn't hers. That girl caught a $2,400,000 0-cents error no one else noticed, and when she reported it, the managing director took the credit and the bonus. She'd kept her head down for 2 more years. Then she left. Now Stephanie sat at the same kind of table, but this time with capital, leverage, and a name. And they were still pretending she didn't belong. Clara closed the binder with a soft click and exhaled. I think we need to pause and reconvene after the weekend. There's more vetting needed on the financial guarantees, especially given the non-traditional structures. Stephanie stood, slow and deliberate. Renee followed. Papers were still being collected when Stephanie said, "You'll have everything you need. You always do." Her tone was controlled, but in her chest was a storm that had not touched daylight in years. Back in the elevator, Renee was already half-turned toward her. They're stalling. They're trying to exhaust you. They want to drag it out until you walk. I know. You gonna? Stephanie didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud wasn't necessary. She had learned long ago that some revolutions begin not with rage, but with retreat. She was going to walk away. But not for the reason they hoped. Because she wasn't coming back to renegotiate. She was coming back for everything. 3 days later, in a private boardroom tucked above the city skyline, Stephanie met with Derek Vaughn, her longtime mentor and co-investor. Derek was in his 60s now, silver hair, thick glasses, and a voice that carried the wear of battles fought in dark conference rooms and glass towers. "He played you," Derek said, setting down a single sheet of paper with Clara's signature in sharp black ink. "You know that, right?" "She underestimated me," Stephanie replied. "That's not the same thing." "Same result." Stephanie leaned over the table, locking eyes with the man who taught her to walk away without closing the door. "She thinks I need the loan." "You don't?" Stephanie smiled. "I already bought the debt behind the building. It's just sitting in a shell corp." The seller was quiet. "Good terms. Cash talks." Derek let out a low whistle. "That's why they're slowing it down. They're hoping the delay bleeds you dry." "It won't." "Deal with it, and when it doesn't?" Stephanie tapped her finger on the edge of the paper. "Then I'll show them what leverage really looks like." That night, Stephanie sat alone in her condo with a glass of Bordeaux and her laptop open to a spreadsheet most hedge fund analysts would get a nosebleed just trying to read. But she wasn't crunching numbers. She was orchestrating pressure. The bank had a soft underbelly. A pending acquisition, a shaky regional deal in the Midwest. Their risk profile was inflated by assets they hadn't yet divested. Stephanie knew because she'd already done the math, already bought half of their pain. Quietly, of course. Renee called. "You sure you want to play it this way?" Stephanie sipped her wine. "They questioned my credit, Renee." "Yeah, better make sure the next time I sit at their table, they thank me for showing up." Stephanie had almost forgotten the feel of this place. The polished marble floors of Blanton Bank's downtown headquarters still gleamed like they did the last time she walked through here as an intern, clutching a coffee tray and praying she wouldn't trip in her Payless heels. Now she moved through the lobby like it was her living room. No badge, no escort, just presence. The receptionist glanced up. Stephanie didn't say her name. She didn't have to. Clara Mullins had requested this meeting. Security cleared her without a word. A hushed protocol had followed her all the way up to the 42nd floor, where everything smelled of leather, mahogany, and control. She remembered when just the idea of this floor made her palms sweat. She remembered when a partner once told her to take the service elevator because clients don't want to see too many interns. She stepped into the waiting area and paused in front of the enormous wall of glass overlooking the skyline. Back then, she used to come up here alone after hours just to look out, just to pretend, just to see how the city looked from up here. But now, the view felt small. Clara appeared from the corner office, wearing a smile so sharp it could carve marble. Her heels clicked like a metronome on stone. "Stephanie, thanks for coming. Always a pleasure." They shook hands like rivals do, brief, formal, untrusting. Inside the office, Clara gestured toward a set of low chairs facing a small conference table. Stephanie didn't sit. She walked to the window instead, hands clasped behind her back, scanning the skyline. It gave her a second to think. Clara waited, not because she wanted to, because she didn't know how else to control the room now. "I'll be blunt," Clara said finally. "You left the deal cold, no response, no follow-up. Then I get wind you've been in contact with our bond counsel. Stephanie, that's not a good look." Stephanie turned, eyes calm, tone measured. Neither is questioning a client's solvency when their firm is holding more liquid than your Q4 lending ceiling. A flush crept up Clara's neck. Stephanie stepped closer. "Let's not do the dance. You didn't want Holt Capital in that building. You didn't think we were the right fit. You slow-rolled us with credit scrutiny to cover the fact that you never planned to close." Clara straightened. "I was doing my job." "So was I." The silence between them felt dense. "You didn't come here for closure," Clara said at last. "No," Stephanie replied. "I came here to make sure you know what's coming." Clara blinked. "I bought in, Clara," Stephanie said softly. "Blanton's. Internal debt. That little regional acquisition in Tulsa, the one with the over-leveraged industrial parks. I picked it up through 3 entities. None of them bear my name. But I assure you, every time those notes mature, I'll be there." "That's not possible." "It's done." Clara stared at her like she was seeing someone new, someone she couldn't control. Stephanie moved to the door. "I'll see you again soon." Back in the elevator, Stephanie didn't smile. She just stood still, letting the moment breathe. The real work had just begun. Across town, Renee was sitting in the tiny glass-walled war room they used for strategy sessions. The table was covered in sticky notes, legal pads, and 3 laptops, each with multiple windows open. She was on her second espresso shot when Stephanie walked in. "You say it?" Renee asked. "I did." "What did she do?" "Swallowed it. Barely." Renee grinned. "I swear, this whole thing feels like vengeance written by Sun Tzu." "It's not vengeance," Stephanie said, sliding into a chair. "It's correction." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Stephanie looked up at the whiteboard, covered in names, holding companies, and arrows. "Is Phase 2? Renee clicked open a file. "We've got offers out to their junior executives. Discreet headhunting. 2 are already showing interest." "Anyone on the board?" "Not yet. But one of their major shareholders just reached out. Apparently your name came up on a list of emerging female capital leaders to watch. He wants a meeting." Stephanie's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Who?" "Ellen Cormier." Stephanie tapped her nail on the table. "He's old guard. Was a Blanton insider for years. This isn't just interest, it's signaling." "Power shift?" "Positioning. He wants to see if he should jump before the ship lists." "And should he?" Stephanie stood again. "He should have already." She walked to the window and looked out over the city. Below them, the rush of life continued. Suits crossing streets, taxis honking, glass towers glowing in early dusk. She didn't see buildings anymore. She saw balance sheets, leverage points, weak joints. Stephanie remembered being 17, standing at the edge of her high school's gymnasium stage after winning the regional math award. She remembered how Principal Dwyer introduced her to the visiting sponsor, who shook hands with every boy and simply nodded at her. She remembered being 24, alone in a hospital hallway, watching her mother take her last breaths after a heart attack they couldn't afford to treat earlier. And she remembered that at every stage of her life, she had to explain her presence. In rooms she earned, at tables she funded, in fields she outperformed. Not anymore. Back in the room, Renee pulled up a bank announcement on her screen. "Clara's stepping down in 6 months. Retirement. Voluntary? Officially. But the chatter says otherwise." Stephanie's jaw tightened. "Then let's make sure she gets a farewell worth remembering." Renee raised a brow. "That's vengeance." Stephanie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because sometimes correction and vengeance wore the same dress. And she was just getting started. The silence in the private suite above the Carlton Exchange building wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. Executives didn't speak too quickly up here. Up here, silence was a strategy. A loaded gun on the table. And Stephanie Holt? She had just pulled the hammer back. "Let's be honest," said Alan Cormier, adjusting his tie but not his expression. "If I back you, you're not just looking to restructure. You're looking to unseat." Stephanie sipped her water. No ice. No response. Alan leaned forward. "Which I'm not against, mind you. I've waited 15 years to watch someone gut that place with a scalpel." Stephanie finally tilted her head. I don't need your scalpel, just your signature. Alan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've got teeth, I'll give you that. But you're one step away from war. Are you ready for that kind of exposure? She leaned forward, slow and unshaken. This isn't exposure. It's reclamation. The man studied her like an auction item, valuable but risky. Stephanie remembered what Renee had told her before this meeting. Alan doesn't do favors. He does trades. So she had prepared a trade he couldn't refuse. She slid the document folder across the table. Alan flipped it open. What am I looking at? Internal assessments, Blanton's Q3 leverage metrics, the stuff they haven't disclosed yet. Alan's eyes narrowed as he skimmed. How did you get— I'm not here to answer that, she said, calm and clear. I'm here to make sure you're not the last one holding a torch in a powder room. He exhaled sharply. She had him. He knew it. You already own parts of the bank, don't you? Stephanie didn't blink. I own just enough to raise eyebrows, not enough to raise alarms yet. He sat back. You want a seat on the board? I want 3. Alan laughed out loud now, but it sounded like a cough. You think you can just— I don't think, she interrupted. I build. And I built Holt Capital to open doors no one wanted me to walk through. 3 seats, equity stake, and an accelerated schedule to install a new internal oversight body. You'll dismantle the whole system. I'll fix what they kept breaking. Alan studied her again, and this time the room felt different. No more posturing, just 2 people who knew the rules and how to rewrite them. Done, he said, but when the knives come out, don't say I didn't warn you. Stephanie stood, extended her hand, and with a voice cold as reason said, I brought my own. 2 hours later, Renee met her in the glass-walled war room, holding a tablet with a live feed from Bland's shareholder portal. They're already moving, she said. Cormier's name just hit the proxy request list. Stephanie nodded. Let the whispers start. Renee scrolled. There's more. The Tulsa subsidiary is under formal audit. You didn't do that, did you? Stephanie allowed herself the faintest smile. Only pointed the flashlight. Someone else opened the closet. Someone inside? Probably someone tired of waiting for a bonus that never came. They both chuckled. The mood was light, but the stakes were tectonic. Stephanie could feel the vibration starting, the subtle tremors of fear and strategy colliding. She knew this world, this language, this tempo. Every institution liked to pretend it was too big to shift, but they all had one thing in common. They bled when you touched the margins. Stephanie walked over to the map pinned across the far wall, an old-school corkboard with threads running between properties, shell firms, and holding companies. One red thread led from a recently renamed LLC in Delaware to a minority stake in Blanton's commercial lending arm. This one here, she said, pointing, gets us the final 2.6% equity needed for voting leverage. The owner won't sell outright, but his fund is bleeding from the biotech slump. We offer liquidity and low interest, bridge capital, with a silent exit clause. Renee nodded. You think he'll go for it? He'll have to. By next quarter, his operating runway disappears. Stephanie turned back to the center of the room, where her team's entire campaign was laid bare in color-coded segments. It wasn't just about buying a bank. It was about rewriting the systems that had tried to write her out. 12 years ago, when she walked away from the industry, she'd done so thinking she would never go back. But this time wasn't about fitting in. It was about reshaping the ground she stood on. And now, her next meeting wasn't with lawyers, it was with ghosts. She stepped into a familiar office building uptown. Same floors, same light. Even the same chipped paint by the elevator button. The firm was now called Belson and Greaves, But back then, it was Wellmore Holdings. And back then, she was Stephanie the intern, Stephanie who always brought coffee, Stephanie who took the fall when Tom botched the model. Now, Stephanie Holt didn't carry coffee. She carried equity. "Executed, Miss Holt," said the receptionist, standing up a little too quickly. "The partners are in conference room B." Stephanie nodded. "They can wait. Bring me water, no ice." She walked down the hallway without waiting for permission. When she stepped into the conference room, 3 men stood up reflexively. All of them wore the same tailored arrogance that once ignored her completely, but today they stood. "Stephanie," said one of them. "Tom, older now, softer around the jaw, but still the same voice that once told her she was too sensitive after he took credit for her pitch deck." She didn't shake his hand, she just sat. "You know why I'm here," she said. Tom cleared his throat. "We've been following the news. Some of your moves have impacted our secondary portfolios. I'm not here for small talk. I'm here for leverage terms. Blanton is restructuring, and you're exposed." One of the partners shifted. "Stephanie, this feels personal. Do I look sentimental to you?" Silence. "I'm offering a quiet exit. We both know your preferred shares were overvalued. I'm the only buyer you'll get above net salvage." Another beat of quiet. Then Tom asked, "And if we don't sell?" Stephanie stood. "Then hold your breath, because the bottom's dropping out next month." She walked out before they could argue, before they could lie, before they could spin it, because what came next wasn't theirs to control. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale as the sun slid lower, casting gold light across the city. Stephanie looked up at the skyline. 12 years ago, she'd looked at it with longing. Now she looked at it like a balance sheet, and everything was starting to add up. The day they signed the bank over to her didn't start with fanfare. There was no orchestra waiting at the door, no photographers lining the sidewalk. Just a name on a dotted line, a notary's stamp, and the smell of fresh ink on old paper. But for Stephanie Holt, it was more than a transaction. It was the reckoning. She walked into Blanton Bank's boardroom without knocking. The door was already open. Renee stood beside her, calm but radiant, her curls pulled back, her black suit sharp enough to draw blood. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every step from the elevator to this room had been carved in stone months ago. Inside, 7 men and 2 women stood from their chairs. The air was tighter than usual. Clara Mullins was gone. Her nameplate no longer sat on the polished table. In its place was a small bouquet. Likely the bank's idea of closure. Stephanie didn't look at it. Alan Cormier rose first. "Ms. Holt, congratulations. The transition documents are complete." "Let's begin," she said, taking her place at the head of the table. They all sat. A junior executive tried to smile at her. She didn't smile back. She opened her binder and began the meeting. "Effective immediately, I will be instating an executive oversight board to review every active commercial lending process. We will be running credit models using equity-weighted scoring algorithms, not legacy underwriting logic. If that's unfamiliar to anyone, my team has brought training packets." A few exchanged glances. No one spoke. Renee handed out folders with color-coded tabs. "You'll also find the new ethics policies and bias intervention protocols. They're no longer optional, nor are they ceremonial." Stephanie looked around the room, her voice even. For too long, this institution measured creditworthiness with a lens of suspicion, not data, not performance, but people. That ends now. One director raised his hand hesitantly. "Will these changes affect our public market relationships?" "People who have lost the use of their legs would have suffered from this for a long time," he said. "Investors prefer evolution over stagnation. We're not performing CPR here. We're rebuilding the bloodstream." She clicked to the next page in her binder. "Lastly, I'll be restructuring the leadership pipeline. Our mentorship program will now include historically black colleges and universities with direct sponsorship. We will no longer draw talent from one pool, and we won't just open doors, we'll hold them." Renee smiled behind her notes. It was the only smile in the room that looked like it belonged. They adjourned at 11:42. A.M. Stephanie stood, collected her things, and walked out without turning back. The silence that followed her wasn't disapproval. It was realization. The kind that sets in too late. Downstairs, reporters had gathered. Word had leaked. Somehow, she wasn't surprised. One of them called her name. "Ms. Holt, how does it feel to own the bank that once questioned your credit?" She paused at the marble steps, looked the reporter in the eye, and said, "I didn't buy the bank. I bought its future." And then she kept walking. Later that afternoon, she returned to her office. Her real office. Not the one with tall windows and brushed steel, but the warm, bustling nerve center of Holt Capital. It smelled like coffee and new ideas. People moved through the halls like they were building something that mattered. Renee was already waiting inside, holding a bottle of champagne she must have stashed for this day. "You ready to celebrate?" she asked. "Not yet," Stephanie said. Renee raised a brow. "You bought a whole bank. What could you possibly be waiting for?" Stephanie pulled a small velvet box from her bag and handed it to her. Renee opened it. Inside was a polished silver pin with the initials RCI engraved in a minimalist serif font. "Real Capital Initiative," Stephanie said. "We're launching next quarter. A fund for first-time developers, specifically women of color. You're running it." Renee looked up, stunned. Stephanie sat down, unbuttoned her blazer. "You once said we couldn't just break ceilings. We had to rebuild floors. This is our foundation." Renee looked at the pin again. Then she laughed, loud and unfiltered, the way you laugh when something is real and undeniable. "You've been planning this?" "For years." Renee leaned back, eyes shining. "I'm in." The celebration came later. After hours. Team members poured into the break room. Someone brought cake, and music played over the speakers. Laughter rose like steam from a city thawing. No one wore suits. No one faked smiles. Everyone belonged. Stephanie stood by the window, watching the skyline turn gold with the setting sun. She could see the top of Blanton Bank from here. It looked smaller from this angle, not because it had changed, but because she had. She felt someone step beside her. It was Derek Vaughn. "I almost didn't believe it," he said. "I almost didn't either." He handed her a glass. "You did what they said couldn't be done." "No," she corrected. "I did what they were afraid would be done." They clinked glasses. He took a sip, then leaned on the window frame. "So what now?" Stephanie smiled. "Now," she said, "we build the kind of table no one questions us at. And if they do, we remind them who taught them how to read the balance sheet." At 9:47 p.m., the last of the staff left for the night. Tiesmere remained, alone in her office, staring at the city. On her desk sat a framed photo, one she'd kept tucked in a drawer for years. It was her and her mother, arms around each other, standing in front of the small apartment they once called home. Her mother had that look, fierce and proud, wearing a Sunday dress and a tired smile. Stephanie touched the frame. "You were right," she whispered. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And somewhere in the hum of the city, in the quiet confidence of a woman who never let them decide her worth, Stephanie Holt smiled. She hadn't just arrived. She had arrived owning the building,